Hello and welcome to AQA Psychology Year 2, and in this video we're going to look at the humanist approach, which started in the 1950s. And humanist approach was really moving away from behaviourism and many of the other approaches. You'll probably find that it seems quite different in style to a lot of the other approaches, and we'll talk more about that towards the end of the video. But the humanists didn't like how negative some of the other approaches were, like the psychodynamic approach assumes that people are aggressive, and they didn't like the fact that that behaviorism was looking at, it was really scientific, only looking at massive groups of people to make rules about behaviour, and that actually what they wanted to look at was human experience and the uniqueness of human experience. So it's quite a different sort of approach to many of the other psychology approaches that you'll look at. So in humanism, what they look at is the individual experience of each person. That's known when you do issues and debates. You'll find out that that's called ideographic. And so they're really looking at what does it mean to be like this person? Can we understand what this person is experiencing and what it's like? So they're not looking at to be really scientific and to use the scientific method. They don't think that you can find out much meaningful from that, and so they want to use more like stuff like case studies or unstructured interviews, so they can really delve down into the meaning of things. The humanist approach also is quite different from the other approaches in that it allows for free will. So the only other approach we've looked at that touches on this really is the cognitive approach, where you have kind of a framework and you can make choices within that. The humanist approach, you'll see, is allowing much more freedom for making choices, that we have responsibility, the ability to make choices, and we can choose sort of what path we take in life, basically. So let's have a look at some of the theories, the main theories within the humanist approach now. That was our basic assumptions. Here are our theories. So one of the key things that the humanist approach talks about is self-actualization. And this is the topmost part of what we call a hierarchy of needs, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which you may have heard of in other contexts. It's quite famous. But if you have a look at this diagram on the screen, what we've got is at the bottom of the pyramid, you've got physical needs, basically, followed by safety needs, then love and belonging, esteem, and then at the top, self-actualization is really your desire to become the best that you can be, to kind of fulfill your potential, if you want to put it in those terms. And it goes that actually you must fulfill the lower levels before you're able to reach the top levels of this. If you've not got shelter, if you're not sleeping, if you've not got food to eat, then you're not going to be able to move up the levels and fulfill your potential, be the best that you could be. So it follows on. If you haven't got something that's on a lower level, you can't move up. But the idea is that through life, we kind of move up and down this pyramid depending on our circumstances. But that we're all kind of aiming to move up to the top at some point. Okay. Right, so if we can't fulfill our needs, that may lead to mental health issues. And another element then is congruence and incongruence, and this is something else that we look at. Congruence is basically the idea that if kind of basically being happy with yourself. So incongruence, all of us have and these are concepts, all of us have how we view ourselves and then how we would like ourselves ideally to be. And those, for most of us, are two quite different things. And that's our perception. It's not necessarily based on reality. What's important is how we perceive it, what we think. So if we have something called congruence, then how we view ourselves and how we view our ideal self, how we'd like ourselves to be, those two things are very similar. And if those two things match, then we have something called congruence and we'll be able to get up to self-actualization. However, if, like many people, those two things are a bit different from each other, if when you're thinking about your ideal self, you think, oh, I'm miles away from that, I'd like to have this, and this characteristics, and I don't, that means you've got something called incongruence, where actually you end up with kind of negative self-esteem, basically, because you're comparing those two and they don't match, and it causes mental health issues. So congruence, where your two selves match. Incongruence, you won't be able to experience self-actualization, and you may experience something called negative self-worth, which we'll move on to. Which I've just said. Okay, so conditions of worth is another key theory that came with humanism, which is not by Maslow, it's by a second guy called Carl Rogers, who's a really important psychologist within the humanist approach. So conditions of worth are the conditions we believe others need us to meet in order for us to be loved, accepted, or respected. So we basically say to ourselves, I only have worth if, and that's and then we list various things, and it's generally things that we think others need us to meet. So let's have a look. This can often be linked to upbringing. So if you have parents who kind of show cupboard love, so they only show affection when somebody is successful or doing well or well behaved, that's imposing what we call conditions of worth. You only have worth if you are well behaved and do well at school and blah blah blah. So Rogers thought that many psychological problems actually had their root in childhood and in these conditions of worth that many people experience when growing up. So it's good that we know this, because now we're able to educate parents more about it. So yeah, later in life, we can, it's not just childhood, we can do this ourselves as well later on in life, and impose it upon ourselves, even though it's not parenting in the same way. So let's just expand that a little bit more. What the antidote is to that Carl Rogers said we would want to get to within therapy is something called unconditional positive regard. So he taught his therapists who were working within the humanist approach to basically demonstrate unconditional positive regard to the people they were working with. So they had to show to their clients unconditional love and acceptance as part of their therapy. So they're always basically validating what the client is saying, what the patient is saying, and showing them and demonstrating to them that they have worth despite anything that they say to them. So they said that this is basically the way that you get over this need for conditions of worth. And yeah, counselling came out of this approach, client-centred counselling. This isn't something you need to know about actually for the A-level, but I think it helps to set it in context, where what happens is your therapist reflects back your thoughts and emotions. This validates them and it shows positive regard. It shows that they've listened to you and it shows that they value you. So it's really, really helpful. Okay, so let's move on to some brief evaluation of the humanist approach. Hopefully you can see it's quite a different approach to many of the ones that we've looked at so far. So good, positive things about humanism. It's a holistic approach. It's not like the biological approach, focusing in on one tiny element and explaining a big behaviour by looking at that tiny element. It's looking at the whole person and that whole person's experience. And that's a strength that makes it stand out within the approaches, because that's actually really important. It stops it from becoming meaningless. You've got its really optimistic, positive approach, acknowledging the positive aspects of behaviour, where you can move up and take choices to move up towards self-actualization, rather than being predetermined to have negative behaviour because of something that's happened to you. Linking in then with free will, where we can make choices. And also there's various bits of research support, which we'll look at in class. Weaknesses of humanism. Self-actualization is quite a vague concept. You may have noticed that as I was explaining it. Kind of fulfilling potential, being the best you can be. How can you ever quantify whether someone's done that? Really, you can't. And there's many aspects of this, including self-actualization, that you can't really test, which, like some of the other ones, means it's one of the less scientific approaches. We want things to be falsifiable. We want to be able to establish if they're true or not, but if we can't test them, then we can't do that. So it means that we don't really know if it's true or not. really well. There isn't enough evidence available to support its claims. That links in with the previous point. We don't have enough evidence because it's unfalsifiable. Cultural bias as well. It's a product of individualist cultures, very like the idea of being the best you can be and fulfilling your potential. Definitely kind of very Western individualist mindset, whereas in many cultures it's more important to see how you can contribute to society, and that's really more the thing that's more important than achieving as an individual. So cultural bias is definitely centered upon a Western mindset. Okay, that was a whistle-stop tour of humanism.